Hey guys, tonight let's just say we're taking a little trip back in time. Way back. Back to an era before comfy beds, before soundproof walls, before the concept that maybe, just maybe, punishments shouldn't involve setting people on fire while they're still conscious. You're stepping off the warm rug of your modern life and into the drafty, flea-bitten castle halls of the Middle Ages. You breathe in air, thick with wood smoke, and something less pleasant. Let's call it general historical unpleasantness. You hear the distant clang of a blacksmith and maybe a faint, chilling scream carried on the wind. Yeah, if you broke the law back then, your bad day wasn't ending with a court summons or community service. You were potentially signing up for an experience that would make your very atoms regret their existence. A reality check. You probably wouldn't survive a week without accidentally saying the wrong thing about someone important or, existing slightly too loud. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you feel like sharing where you're tuning in, drop your location and the time in the comments below. It's always nice to know how far these whispers travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine for a moment you found yourself on the wrong side of the local lord. Maybe you question his divine right to rule. Perhaps you borrowed a loaf of bread without asking, or maybe you just had a face he didn't like. Whatever the transgression, the guards with rusty armor and questionable hygiene standards have escorted you to a rather ornate piece of furniture. It's a chair, yes, but not one you'd want to relax in after a long day. This is the iron chair, sometimes known as the chair of torture. And it's exactly as welcoming as it sounds. Crafted entirely from metal, often with spikes or restraints built in it, looks less like seating and more like a prop from a very, very bad heavy metal album cover. As they guide you towards it, the metal feels cold under your fingertips. If you happen to brush against it, a chilling promise of the heat to come. The room smells damp and earthy, maybe a little like fear and old sweat. Classic dungeon aesthetics. You hear the shuffle of feet, the low, guttural commands of the guards, and your own heart hammering a frantic rhythm against your ribs. This isn't just furniture. It's a state-sponsored barbecue pit, and you, my friend, are on the menu. Historically, devices like the iron chair were less about obtaining confessions and more about pure, agonizing punishment and intimidation. They were tools of terror designed to make an example of you, a living, screaming billboard warning others to behave. While detailed schematics and widespread use across all of medieval Europe are debated by historians, accounts from places like Nuremberg and other parts of the Holy Roman Empire describe these chairs being employed for crimes deemed particularly offensive to the church or the state, such as heresy, blasphemy, or even serious cases of adultery. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd see for stealing a chicken usually. This was for the big league sins against established power structures. You're looking at the metal, seeing the crude workmanship, maybe a bit of dry, dark residue you really don't want to think about. A guard roughly shoves you forward, and the cold metal bites into your skin through your thin tunic. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that the spikes on these chairs weren't always razor sharp or designed to immediately impale. Often they were blunt, intended to cause immense pain and discomfort without actually killing you outright, at least not quickly. They prevented you from finding even a millimeter of comfort, so you're not instantly kebab-ed but you're pinned exposed and excruciatingly uncomfortable. It's the medieval equivalent of sitting on 100 thumbtacks, amplified by 1,000. Imagine trying to explain that to someone back in your time. Oh, rough day at work. Yeah, sat on a medieval, spiky chair for a few hours. Forgot my lunch. Puts things in perspective, doesn't it? They might strap your wrists and ankles down, maybe even clamp your head in place. You are now one with the chair. And then the second, arguably worse phase begins. Beneath the seat, they place hot coals or light a fire. Slowly, agonizingly, the metal begins to heat up. It doesn't happen instantly. It's a creeping warmth that soon becomes a searing heat, radiating through the metal, through your clothes, directly into your flesh. You can't move. You can't escape. You can only sit there and feel the temperature rise. Historians still argue whether the primary goal was always the red-hot scenario, or if lower temperatures were also used for prolonged agony, causing severe burns without instant death. Either way, your skin is starting to feel like it's being held against a branding iron. This wasn't a quick process. The fire would be stoked, the metal growing hotter and hotter. You'd feel the fabric of your clothes smoke then char. The smell of burning cloth and something far, far worse would fill the air. You'd writhe against the restraints, but they hold firm. The spikes blunt or not press deeper as you strain. Every point of contact with the metal becomes a point of unbearable agony. You can feel the heat not just on your skin, but deep inside, radiating into your bones. It's like being slowly cooked from the outside, infused to your metal prison. This is where the name Iron Chair earns its terrifying reputation. It wasn't just a chair made of iron. It was a chair designed to make you become part of the iron literally. The heat climbs. It sears through your clothes, through your skin. It's a deep, burning agony that blankets you entirely wherever metal touches flesh. You can hear the crackle of the fire below, feel its breath against your legs, through the gaps in the chair's structure. Sweat beads on your forehead, not from exertion, but from the sheer, unbearable temperature radiating into you. You try to pull away, to arch your back, but the restraints, the spikes, the very shape of the chair holds you fast. This isn't like touching a hot pan for a second. This is being held on the hot pan while it gets steadily hotter. You scream, but in this damp stone room, your cries are muffled, absorbed by the thick walls, heard only by the impassive guards who tend the fire. Your skin begins to blister, then to char. The smell intensifies, becoming that sickeningly sweet, acrid odor of burning flesh. It's a smell that would haunt the air around places of execution, a smell that would make anyone passing by hurry their steps and avert their gaze. This is a mainstream historical fact. Public punishments served as powerful sensory warnings. The sights, the sounds, the smells, they were all part of the deterrent. You weren't just punishing the individual. You were delivering a visceral lesson to the entire community. Imagine walking down the street and catching that scent on the breeze. It's a memory your nose wouldn't forget anytime soon, a fragrant reminder to maybe attend church regularly and keep your opinions to yourself. Some historical accounts, though less frequently cited than others, suggest that sometimes oils or fats might be applied to the chair or the victim to enhance the burning process, ensuring the skin adhered more effectively to the metal. This particular quirky or fringe tidbit adds an extra layer of macabre efficiency to the whole horrifying procedure. It's the medieval equivalent of basting the turkey. Only you, are the turkey, and the goal is maximum unforgettable pain and destruction of tissue. Imagine someone standing there, calmly applying lard while you're screaming. It adds a whole new level of, "Are you serious?" to the situation. Your body is now reacting on instinct. Muscles tense, jaw clenches, eyes water from the heat and the smoke. You might try to bite your tongue to distract from the pain, a futile effort as the agony is everywhere. You might even welcome unconsciousness, but often the process was designed to keep you agonizingly aware for as long as possible. They weren't in a hurry. Justice medieval style was often a slow, drawn-out affair. Historians still argue whether the primary intention of devices like the iron chair was solely lethal, or if survival, albeit severely scarred and traumatized, was sometimes a possibility after prolonged but non-fatal exposure to heat. Was it always a death sentence, or sometimes a horrific form of permanent incapacitation and public shaming? The records are often sparse and open to interpretation. As the metal glows red hot, your body is literally cooking. The spikes, which seemed like a secondary problem, now become instruments of deeper torment as they press into burning flesh. Your screams might turn hoarse, then weak eventually, just a rasping breath as your lungs fill with smoke and the shock takes its toll. Your vision might blur the dark room swirling with the orange glow of the heated metal and the flickering fire below. There's a certain grotesque beauty in the way the metal shines in the darkness, a malevolent fiery aura emanating from your personal torture device. This wasn't a quick end. Depending on the fuel used and the desired outcome, you could endure this for a considerable time. Minutes would feel like hours, hours like an eternity. The pain doesn't peak and fade. It simply intensifies, a relentless crushing presence that consumes everything. You might start to hallucinate your mind, desperately trying to escape the reality of your physical torment. Familiar faces might appear in the smoke, distorted and mocking. You might hear voices, echoes of your accusers or judges. It's not just physical torture. It's a full sensory assault designed to break your mind long before your body gives out. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we talked about in a previous life. This makes that sound like a spa treatment. Seriously, give me the dung any day. Finally, mercifully, your body begins to shut down. The screaming stops. The writhing ceases. You slump forward or hang limply against the restraints fused to the metal that became your tomb. The fire is allowed to die down the metal, cools, leaving a charred fused husk behind. Getting the body off the chair. That was often another grim task, sometimes requiring tools to pry the remains away from the now cold metal. The chair would be cleaned, or perhaps left as a chilling display, ready for the next unfortunate soul who dared to step out of line. And as the last wisps of smoke curl upwards, the message is clear for anyone who saw, heard, or smelled what happened here: obey. Or face the consequences. Consequences that involve becoming one with a very, very hot metal chair, leaving behind the lingering scent of scorched metal and, well, everything else that happened there. You find yourself being dragged towards a different kind of structure. This one isn't small and intimate like a chair. This is large, prominent, usually set up in a public square or on a hill overlooking the town. It's a wheel, a massive wooden or sometimes metal wheel, the kind you might imagine on a cart or a mill, but oriented horizontally or tilted upwards. This is the breaking wheel, also known as the Catherine wheel, after St. Catherine of Alexandria. who legend says was sentenced to be executed on one, though it supposedly broke before it could kill her. You probably won't have that kind of luck. Your crime in this scenario might be murder, or maybe something even worse in the eyes of the medieval law, like treason. These were capital offenses, crimes that demanded not just death, but a spectacle of suffering that would scar the public memory. And the breaking wheel provided that spectacle with horrifying efficiency. As you get closer, you can see the rough-hewn wood, maybe stained dark from previous uses. There might be iron bands reinforcing it, and spokes radiating outwards. It looks solid heavy and utterly unforgiving. You're not going for a pleasant ride. You're about to become part of a gruesome demonstration. The process begins by securing you to the wheel. Your limbs are stretched out along the spokes' wrists and ankles, tied firmly to the outer rim. Your body forms a rough star shape against the wheel's surface. It's an awkward position, uncomfortable even before the real pain starts. You're exposed, vulnerable, laid out for everyone in the gathered crowd to see. Because, and this is a mainstream historical fact, these executions were public events drawing crowds like macabre festivals. People would gather to watch, sometimes for religious reasons, sometimes for entertainment, often just because there wasn't much else going on. You were the main act in a theater of cruelty. Once you're tied down, the executioner, often a figure both feared and shunned, would step forward. His tool is simple, but brutally effective: a heavy club, a bar of iron, or sometimes even a large hammer. The goal isn't a quick death. The goal is to break every bone in your body without killing you immediately. The executioner would rhythmically strike your limbs in the gaps between the spokes: upper arms, forearms, thighs, shins. With each blow, you'd hear the sickening thud of the club hitting flesh and bone, followed by your own involuntary scream. Your limbs would go from being solid structures to pulpy, broken things held together only by skin and muscle. It's the original human piñata. Only the candy inside is... well, let's not dwell on that. Imagine the sound, the dull thump of the club, the sharp crack of breaking bone, your own ragged, desperate cries. It's a symphony of suffering played out for the benefit of the onlookers. Your body convulses with each impact, straining against the ropes. Pain unlike anything you've ever known explodes through you. You might feel your arm buckle, your leg shatter, the sharp ends of broken bones grinding against each other internally. It's systematic destruction, bone by bone. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some variations of this punishment, especially in parts of the Holy Roman Empire, there might be a platform or cross underneath the wheel. After your bones were thoroughly shattered, you might be lifted, or the wheel tilted, and your broken body would be woven through the spokes of the wheel, or tied to the supporting structure, leaving you in a broken, contorted mess. This wasn't just about breaking you. It was about displaying the broken result. Your ruined body became a permanent, grotesque sculpture of justice. Historians still argue whether the precise sequence of blows and the target limbs were strictly standardized across different regions, or if local customs and the executioner's discretion played a significant role. Were there specific protocols for hitting arms versus legs? Did they start from the feet up or the other way around? The surviving records offer variations, suggesting a lack of universal rules for this particular brand of horror. One thing is certain, though: the end result was always the same. A body utterly destroyed, but still alive. You lie there, a mass of broken limbs, every movement sending excruciating pain through you. Breathing is shallow and ragged. The initial shock might give way to a dazed agony. You are still conscious, still feeling everything, but now you are completely incapacitated. You are trapped on the wheel, your body a mangled wreck, the crowd murmuring below. The sun beats down on you, or maybe the cold wind bites at your broken skin. You're left there, a living suffering exhibit. You are a ruin. Your body just moments ago, a functional, if scared collection of bones and muscle, is now little more than a sack of shattered fragments held together by skin. You are a testament to the efficiency of a heavy club. The shock is immense, but you're still alive. You can feel the dull ache spreading from every point of impact, a deep, crushing pain that makes breathing a monumental effort. Your vision might tunnel the faces of the crowd, blurring into indistinct blobs. Sounds seem distant, muffled by the roaring in your ears. This is what it means to be broken on the wheel. Not just psychologically, but physically rendered useless, every major load-bearing structure within you pulverized. Sometimes, if the executioner was feeling merciful, and medieval mercy is a deeply relative concept, the final blow might be delivered to your chest or neck, a coup de grace intended to end your suffering relatively quickly after the breaking was complete. But often this final mercy was not granted. And this is a mainstream historical fact. The suffering on the wheel could be prolonged for hours, sometimes even days before death finally came. You weren't immediately killed. You were displayed as a living, agonizing warning. Left exposed on the wheel, your broken body is subject to the elements. The sun would beat down, causing dehydration and sunburn on your already ruined skin. Or the cold wind and rain would bite, adding the misery of exposure to your existing torment. Flies would be drawn to the blood and open wounds. And then there are the birds. Carrion birds like crows and ravens drawn by the scent would begin to gather perching nearby waiting. They saw you not as a person, but as a future meal. It's a truly horrifying thought that your final moments might involve being pecked to death while still conscious but unable to defend yourself. A quirky tidbit about this particular form of execution: in some regions, the number of blows delivered was specified beforehand based on the severity of the crime. A more heinous crime might warrant a specific higher number of strikes. It's like having a menu of misery where your punishment is customized based on how badly you messed up. Imagine the bureaucratic nightmare of logging that. Yes, sir, offender, 7G standard treason package. 15 blows to the major limbs, followed by public display. Sign here. As time drags on, your strength wanes. The pain doesn't lessen, but your ability to react to it diminishes. Thirst becomes unbearable. Your broken limbs swell and discolor. Infection would inevitably set in if you somehow survived long enough. You are a static, gruesome monument to the state's power slowly dying in plain sight. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of such prolonged public agony as a deterrent outweighed the potential for public sympathy or desensitization over time. Did seeing such horrors truly prevent crime? Or did it just make people harder, more callous, or simply better at not getting caught? The end would come, eventually, from dehydration, blood loss, shock, or perhaps mercifully carried away by the final descent into unconsciousness. Your broken body would remain on the wheel for days, weeks, sometimes even months, until nothing but a skeleton remained, picked clean by birds and weathered by the elements. It was a macabre landmark, a constant visual reminder of the consequences of challenging authority or committing serious crimes. You were literally left to rot on display, a stark message etched against the skyline. It really makes that embarrassing moment you had in the grocery store seem trivial, doesn't it? Just another day at the medieval office. The wheel would stand there, a silent testament to the power wielded by lords and kings. The wood might weather, the iron might rust, but the memory of the screams, the thud of the club, and the sight of the broken body would linger in the collective consciousness of the community. It was designed to instill fear, to make the very thought of serious crime utterly repellent. And judging by the sheer horror of it, you can imagine it was probably quite effective at that. Just don't think about it too much as you're drifting off. Wouldn't want any nightmares about giant spinning wood. Leaving the grisly image of the breaking wheel behind you, find yourself transported to a slightly less structurally complex punishment, but one no less insidious. This one strikes at the very core of communication, at your ability to express yourself. Imagine living in a time where saying the wrong thing wasn't just socially awkward, but a potentially life-altering and mouth-altering offense. Welcome to the age of the tongue clamp. Your crime here isn't theft or murder, it's verbal. Maybe you slandered a noble, spread gossip about the priest, or worst of all, spoke ill of the king or the lord of the land. In societies where power rested on reputation and divine right words held immense power, and controlling speech was paramount, free speech wasn't a thing. In fact, speech was often the most dangerous weapon you possessed, and the medieval authorities had a way of disarming you permanently. You're brought before the magistrate or a minor official. There's no large crowd gathered this time, perhaps just a few grim-faced guards and the required witnesses. The air feels cold, maybe in a small stone chamber. The tool they present is made of metal, often iron, and it looks disturbingly like a set of pliers or tongs, but designed specifically for, well, your tongue. It might have rough edges, or even spikes on the inside. It's not intricate, just brutally functional. This is the tongue clamp. The process is straightforward in its horror. You're held firmly, your head perhaps tilted back. A guard forces open your mouth. You try to resist, but you're overpowered. Then the clamp is applied. It's placed around your tongue, gripping it tightly. The metal is cold and hard against the soft, sensitive tissue of your mouth. You gag, you choke, you try to pull away, but the grip is absolute. It pinches, it squeezes, and it silences you instantly, not because you can't speak, but because the pain and the physical restriction make it impossible. It's the medieval equivalent of being permanently muted. Imagine trying to complain about that with the clamp still on. A frustrating and painful exercise in futility. Now, a mainstream historical fact, punishing speech-related offenses was common across medieval Europe. From minor public scoldings to severe mutilation or even execution, the consequences for uncontrolled language could be extreme. This wasn't just about maintaining order. It was about maintaining the established hierarchy and suppressing dissent. Your words were literally your leash, and the authorities held the other end. The tongue clamp could be used in a few ways. Sometimes it was simply applied and left in place for a period as a form of public humiliation and pain, a physical reminder of your verbal transgression. You might be paraded through the streets wearing the clamp, unable to speak. your swollen, bruised tongue held prisoner in the metal vise. The inability to speak, combined with the visible symbol of your punishment, was a powerful shaming tactic. Imagine being unable to explain yourself, unable to apologize, just mute and in agony while people stare. It's a special kind of helplessness, a quirky tidbit related to tongue punishments. While the clamp is one method, simply cutting out the tongue entirely was also a practice in some areas for severe blasphemy or treasonous speech. Sometimes they might not remove the whole thing, but just the tip. So you might still be able to make sounds, but coherent speech would be impossible. The clamp in some cases might have been a precursor to this, or an alternative designed to inflict pain and silence without necessarily removing the tongue entirely, at least initially. It's like choosing between having your internet disconnected temporarily or having your keyboard smashed with a hammer. Both bad, different levels of permanent damage. Historians still argue whether the primary use of devices specifically labeled as tongue clamps was always intended for crushing or puncturing the tongue, or if some were primarily designed purely for holding it painfully captive during other procedures or public displays. Were they torture devices meant to extract confessions through agony, or primarily instruments of physical silencing and public shame? The line between torture punishment and public humiliation was often blurry in the Middle Ages, and these devices likely served multiple overlapping purposes, depending on the context and the whim of the authority figure in charge. As you stand there clamped and silenced, you feel the metal pressing against your tongue. It might dig in drawing blood. Your mouth fills with saliva and a coppery taste. You try to swallow, but the clamp makes it difficult, maybe impossible. You can only make choked sounds, gurgles of pain and frustration. The guards watch impassively. Your voice, your means of expression, has been literally shackled. This isn't just pain. It's a profound sense of powerlessness, a cruel reminder that in this world, your words could cost you your voice itself. The cold, hard bite of the metal clamp on your tongue is a constant throbbing agony. Every slight movement of your head, every involuntary spasm of your muscles sends a fresh wave of pain. You can taste the metal, the fear, the blood if the clamp has broken the delicate surface of your tongue. It feels alien and wrong to have this hard, unyielding object invading the soft space of your mouth, holding captive the very part of you that forms words. You try to breathe deeply, but the discomfort makes it shallow and ragged. You're trapped in a cage of metal, and pain a prisoner of your own speech. In some instances, the clamp wasn't just left on for a period of public shaming. It could be tightened, designed to crush the tongue, or hold it out so it could be mutilated further. This is where the punishment moves from painful restraint to permanent physical damage. The clamp might have spikes on the inside that pierce the tongue as it's tightened, or simply exert enough pressure to cause severe swelling and bruising, potentially leading to necrosis or long-term damage. It's a targeted attack on a specific body part deemed responsible for the crime. If your tongue offended, your tongue would pay the price. A mainstream historical fact about medieval justice is its focus on lex talionis, or the law of retaliation, an eye for an eye. While not always applied literally, there was often a symbolic connection between the crime and the punishment. If your hands stole, your hands might be cut off. If your feet carried you to commit a crime, your feet might be maimed. And if your tongue spoke treason or slander, then your tongue was subject to punishment. The tongue clamp fits neatly into this framework, directly targeting the offending organ. Consider the social impact. If you were seen with the clamp, or worse, after your tongue had been permanently damaged or removed, you were instantly identifiable as someone who had challenged authority through speech. You were marked both physically and socially. This wasn't a punishment you could hide easily. It served as a constant reminder to you and everyone who saw you of the risks involved in speaking your mind. It's like having a scarlet letter tattooed on your face, only more painful, and you can't talk about how much it hurts. Here's a quirky tidbit. While the image of the tongue clamp is powerful, specific detailed descriptions of its widespread use and standardized design are actually less common in surviving texts than accounts of cutting out tongues or other forms of mutilation. This has led some historians to believe that while devices like this certainly existed and were used, they might have been less universally employed than cruder, more direct methods of silencing offenders, or perhaps were more specific to certain regions or types of judicial proceedings. It's possible that the reputation of the clamp was as much a deterrent as its actual use. The idea that this could happen might have been enough to keep people quiet. Historians still argue whether the primary historical sources mentioning clamps or similar devices for the mouth always refer to a specific torture instrument, or might sometimes describe simpler devices used for restraining prisoners or keeping their mouths open for inspection, or force feeding. The terminology used in medieval texts can be inconsistent, and interpreting the exact nature and use of these tools requires careful linguistic and contextual analysis. Was every mention of a mouth iron or tongue press referring to the elaborate torture device we imagine, or sometimes something more basic? You remain there, jaw-aching tongue, throbbing, utterly incapable of forming coherent words. The world continues around you, sounds reaching your ears, sights filling your eyes, but you are isolated by your inability to communicate. Your thoughts are trapped inside a silent scream against the injustice or the pain or the sheer absurdity of it all. You might try to signal with your hands to make noises, but the guards understand only the language of their duty and your punishment. If the clamp was removed, you'd be left with a swollen, lacerated, or potentially crushed tongue. Speaking would be incredibly painful, perhaps impossible, or result in a permanent lisp or impediment. If the tongue was partially or fully removed, silence would become your new normal. The vibrant organ that allowed you to taste, to swallow easily, and most importantly, to speak, would be gone or severely damaged. It's a punishment that leaves you alive, but fundamentally altered a chilling example of the price of defiant words in a world that valued obedience above all else. Leaving the silent, aching world of the tongue clamp behind, we move to the absolute pinnacle of medieval brutality. This wasn't for slandering your neighbor or stealing a loaf of bread. Oh no, this was for the big one. This was for the crime that struck at the very heart of the kingdom, the ultimate act of disloyalty, high treason. If you were found guilty of plotting against the king, attempting to overthrow the government, or aiding the enemy, your sentence wasn't just death. It was a multi-part, exceptionally gruesome process designed to inflict maximum suffering, public humiliation, and ensure there was absolutely nothing left of you to bury with dignity. This is hang, drawn, and quartered. You are dragged through the streets tied to a wooden frame or a hurdle, a rough sled pulled by a horse. This is the drawing part, but not the disemboweling part yet. That comes later. For now, You're just being dragged along the ground through mudstones and whatever other delightful street refuse has accumulated. The crowd watches a mix of morbid curiosity, fear, and perhaps genuine anger at your perceived betrayal. This public procession is part of the humiliation, ensuring everyone knows who you are and what you supposedly did. It's the medieval walk of shame, only significantly more painful and dirty. You feel the jolting ride, the scrape of the wood beneath you, the stares of the people. Your destination is the gallows, a prominent structure, usually erected on a hill outside the town walls or in a public square. It's a familiar symbol of medieval justice, but today it's just the first stop on a much longer, more terrible journey. You are lifted from the hurdle, bruised and battered from the drag, and a rope is placed around your neck. This is the hanged part, but with a crucial, cruel twist. A mainstream historical fact about being hanged, drawn, and quartered. It was a specific punishment codified in English law, particularly after the reign of Edward I, and reserved almost exclusively for men convicted of high treason. Women convicted of the same crime were typically burned at the stake, which, while also horrifying, was a different process altogether. So this particular brand of multi-stage agony was gender-specific, adding a layer of historical particularity to the horror. The rope is tightened, but not enough to cause a quick death. You're pulled up your feet, dangling the noose cutting into your throat. You gag. You choke, your vision blacks out at the edges. This isn't meant to kill you, or at least not finish the job. It's meant to partially strangle you, to bring you to the very brink of death, maybe even briefly lose consciousness before they cut you down. You hang there struggling for breath, the world spinning, the sound of the crowd, a distant roar in your ears. It's a calculated cruelty, ensuring you suffer the sensation of hanging without the release of death. Here's a quirky tidbit. The term drawn actually has two possible interpretations among historians when it comes to this punishment. One is being dragged on the hurdle to the execution site, which you've just experienced. The other, which we'll get to in the next section, is the drawing out of your internal organs. The ambiguity in historical texts has led to ongoing debate about the precise sequence and meaning of each part of the phrase in the earliest instances of this punishment. So even the name of this horrific act is open to scholarly discussion. You are cut down while you are still alive, or at least barely conscious. The sudden release of tension is jarring, but it brings you back to the brutal reality of your situation. You gasp for air, coughing and sputtering, the rope burn on your neck a raw, searing pain. Your head throbs, your vision slowly clears, and you realize the ordeal is far from over. You've been halfway hanged, denied the relative mercy of a quick end. Historians still argue whether the degree of hanging was strictly controlled, or if it was left to the executioner's judgment. Was the goal just a brief strangulation, or were they meant to bring you right to the edge of death? The variations in historical accounts suggest it may have differed, depending on the time period, the location, and perhaps even how much the executioner liked or disliked the condemned. It adds another layer of unpredictable horror to an already appalling sentence. You are limp, disoriented, but alive enough to feel the cold ground beneath you and the rough hands that seize you. The crowd presses closer, eager to witness the next stages. You've survived the hangman's noose, but you're about to face something far, far worse. The air which you fought so hard to breathe now seems thick with anticipation. Your body aches from the drag and the hanging, but that pain is about to be utterly eclipsed You are lying on the ground, coughing, gasping, the world still swimming slightly from the near strangulation. Before you can even fully regain your bearings, rough hands seize you again. You are secured, likely tied down to a table or a board near the gallows. You feel the rough texture of the wood against your back. The crowd is still there, murmuring, watching a sea of faces, eager for the next act. The air is no longer just thick with anticipation. There's a metallic tang to it now, a scent you instinctively recognize as blood. This is the second deeply unpleasant meaning of drawn. In this punishment, the disembowelment, the executioner or his assistants approach you with knives, not always sharp, clean surgical instruments, mind you, but often crude practical blades. Your clothing is cut or torn away from your abdomen. You feel the cold steel against your skin, a terrifying contrast to the heat you might have imagined in the iron chair. You try to struggle, but you are too weak, too securely bound. Then comes the cut, a swift, deep incision into your belly. The pain is instantaneous, blinding. It's a searing, ripping sensation that tears through muscle and tissue. You scream again, a raw, guttural sound that is quickly swallowed by the noise of the crowd and the casual movements of the executioner. You feel a sudden, sickening release of pressure inside you, followed by warmth as blood spills out. A mainstream historical fact, the disembowelment was carried out while the victim was still alive. This wasn't just a post-mortem butchery. It was a key part of the suffering inflicted for treason. The idea was to ensure maximum agony and degradation. Your insides were literally brought outside a gruesome display for all to witness. It was a profound violation, reducing a human being to a pile of twitching organs. The executioner would then begin to pull out your intestines, your stomach, your other internal organs. You feel the tugging, the pulling, the sickening sensation of your own body being unpacked. It's an unimaginable agony, a violation on the most fundamental level. You might try to push them back to resist, but your hands are tied. You can only writhe against your bonds, scream against the pain, and watch horrified as your own vital organs are removed and often displayed to the crowd. Sometimes they were even burned in front of you. Imagine witnessing that. Your own insides being tossed onto a fire. It's a level of psychological torment that's hard to comprehend. Here's a quirky tidbit about this stage. Accounts suggest that some executioners were more skilled than others at keeping the victim alive during the disembowelment. A really practiced one could keep you conscious and suffering for a surprisingly long time, carefully removing organs to prolong the agony. A less skilled one might accidentally hit a major artery or cause fatal shock more quickly. So your level of suffering could to some extent depend on the competency of the person cutting you open. A medieval performance review for executioners must have been interesting. Increased efficiency in prolonging disembowelment exceeding quarterly targets. Room for improvement in crowd engagement. You are losing blood rapidly now. Your breathing is shallow. Your heart racing frantically. The shock is setting in, but the pain is still fiercely present. You can feel the cold air on your exposed insides, the sticky warmth of your blood soaking the ground beneath you. Your vision might start to dim again, the faces of the crowd blurring through a film of sweat and agony. This is a raw, visceral encounter with death drawn out and made public. Historians still argue whether the specific organs removed and the order in which they were taken out followed a set procedure or varied? Were certain organs like the heart always removed and perhaps shown to the crowd while still beating? Or was it simply a general evisceration? The details can be inconsistent across different accounts, making it difficult to reconstruct the precise steps of this gruesome process definitively. What is clear is that it was a bloody, agonizing mess designed to horrify and degrade. You lie there, open to the air, your life draining away. The sounds are a confusing mix of your own fading gasps, the murmurs of the crowd, and the wet, unpleasant sounds of the executioner's work. This is the price of treason, a payment made not in coin, but in pain, humiliation, and the public dismantling of your body. You are no longer just a person. You are a lesson, a warning etched in blood and entrails. And the worst, believe it or not, is still yet to come. You are barely clinging to life, your body, a ravaged mess after the disembowelment. The pain is immense, but perhaps dulled slightly by shock and blood loss. Your vision is blurry, the sounds around you distant and distorted. You might wish for death, plead for it even. But mercy is a concept largely absent from this particular stage of the proceedings. You are kept alive just long enough for the final horrific act. This is the quartered part. Not quartered like chopped into 4 pieces with an axe, though that sometimes happened too, but literally pulled into 4 pieces. They would attach ropes to each of your limbs. These ropes were then tied to horses, strong, powerful animals standing ready, usually facing outwards from your position. You are stretched out, held down, with the potential energy of 4 horses straining against you. A mainstream historical fact about quartering by horses, this method was used in various forms across Europe, often for the most heinous crimes like high treason or regicide, killing a king. It was designed not just to kill you, but to utterly dismember your body, leaving no intact form for burial. It was the ultimate desecration, denying the condemned even the small dignity of a complete grave. Your body was quite literally torn apart. You feel the ropes being tightened around your wrists and ankles. The leather is rough, biting into your skin. You might feel a preliminary tug as the horses shift their weight, a terrifying foretaste of the forces about to be unleashed upon your broken body. The executioner gives a signal, a command to the handlers of the horses. The horses strain forward, pulling against the ropes. The force is incredible. Your limbs are stretched muscles, tearing bones, snapping with sickening cracks. You feel the tearing, the pulling, the agonizing separation of your body at the joints. It's a pain that transcends anything you've felt so far, a total catastrophic destruction of your physical form. You might scream one last time, a sound of ultimate agony and despair before your body finally gives way. Your limbs are wrenched from their sockets, pulled away from your torso. Your body is quite literally pulled apart into 4 pieces, 2 arms and 2 legs separated from the trunk. It's a bloody, violent spectacle designed for maximum impact on the onlookers. The ground around you becomes soaked with blood. The air fills with the sounds of tearing flesh and bone and the terrified snorts of the horses. It's chaos, brutality, and finality rolled into one horrifying act. Here's a quirky tidbit. Depending on the time period and location, sometimes the horses were replaced by oxen, which pulled more slowly and with immense steady force, potentially prolonging the agony of the dismemberment. Imagine the difference between a sudden violent tear and a slow, relentless stretch until your body finally gives way. Different kinds of nightmare fuel, but equally effective at the core task. Historians still argue whether oxen were preferred in some regions specifically because their slower pull might extend the suffering compared to the more abrupt force of horses. After your body has been torn apart, the four limbs and the torso were not typically given to your family for burial. This is another mainstream historical fact. The remains of those executed for high treason were often put on display. The head might be placed on a spike on Tower Bridge in London, for example, a grim warning to anyone entering the city. The limbs might be sent to different parts of the kingdom and displayed in prominent locations. This was the final act of the punishment, not just killing you, but dispersing your remains to serve as widespread public deterrence. You, or rather, the pieces of you, are now scattered, a dismembered testament to the king's power and the consequences of challenging it. There is no body left to bury, no grave to visit. You have been physically annihilated, and your remains used as propaganda. This wasn't just death. It was erasure, a deliberate act to remove you, not just from life, but from the possibility of any dignified remembrance. Your final moments were a public agonizing, dismantling a message sent piece by piece across the land. Puts your worst breakup into perspective, doesn't it? Medieval justice really knew how to say, "We're done," with emphasis. Historians still argue whether the specific methods and sequences within hang-drawn and quartered remained entirely consistent over the centuries it was practiced, or if elements evolved or varied based on political climate or the individual preferences of rulers and executioners, while the core elements, hanging, disemboweling, and dismemberment, were constant. The precise way they were carried out might have seen regional or temporal differences. Leaving behind the utterly dismembered reality of high treason, we step back slightly from the physical destruction and enter the realm of public humiliation. Not all medieval punishments involved tearing you apart or setting you on fire. Sometimes the goal was to break your spirit, to shame you in front of your community, and to make you a walking, talking, or in this case, maybe not talking example of bad behavior. For the lesser, but still annoying social crimes, things like persistent gossip, public disputes, nagging your spouse relentlessly, or generally being a public nuisance, there was a special kind of fashion statement waiting for you. Enter the shame mask. You've been caught, let's say, spreading particularly juicy and perhaps untrue rumors about the baker's wife, or maybe you and your neighbor had a shouting match in the town square that disrupted market day. Your punishment isn't the gallows. It's something arguably more psychologically tormenting in its own way. You are brought before the local authorities, and instead of chains or instruments of pain, they bring out a mask. But this isn't a festive mask for a carnival. This is a heavy, uncomfortable mask made of iron or tin designed to enclose your head. And it's not just a blank face. These masks were often crafted into deliberately humiliating shapes. You might find yourself staring out from behind the snout of a pig, the long ears of a donkey, or the grotesque grin of a clown. Sometimes they had additional features, like a long, flapping metal tongue for gossips or sharp teeth for scolds. This is the shame mask, also known by delightful names like the scold's bridle or gossip's mask. You feel the weight of the metal as it's placed over your head. It's cold and presses uncomfortably against your face. Eye holes are cut out so you can see, and maybe small holes for breathing, but otherwise you are enclosed. The metal is heavy, making your neck ache. It smells faintly of old metal and maybe something else you can't quite place. perhaps the lingering scent of the last wearer's embarrassment. You are literally given a new humiliating identity to wear in public. Before TikTok call-outs, before viral videos of public meltdowns, there were literal clown masks designed to highlight your foolishness. A mainstream historical fact about shame masks or scold's bridles. They were particularly common in England and Scotland from the 16th century onwards, although similar concepts of public humiliation existed earlier and elsewhere in Europe. They were disproportionately used on women reflecting societal anxieties about female speech and public behavior. While men could also be subject to public shaming devices, the scold's bridle specifically became strongly associated with controlling women perceived as gossips or nags. Once the mask is on, it's often locked in place. You can't take it off yourself. You are now ready for the next part of the punishment the public display. You are led out into the streets, often tethered to a post in the town square, or paraded through the most populated areas. You are visible to everyone, your identity hidden behind a mask of shame, your crime advertised by your appearance. Children might laugh. Others might point and whisper. Some might avert their gaze out of pity or discomfort. You are a living caricature of your misdeed. Here's a quirky tidbit about some scold's bridles. Some versions incorporated a metal plate or spike that was designed to be inserted into the mouth, specifically pressing down on the tongue. This wasn't just about hiding your face. It was about physically preventing you from speaking, or if you tried inflicting pain or injury to your tongue. It's a terrifying crossover between the tongue clamp and the shame mask, ensuring that the instrument of your crime, your mouth and tongue, was directly punished and silenced. Imagine trying to nag your husband with a metal spike pressing into your tongue every time you open your mouth. Problem solved, medieval style. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these devices was physical torment, public humiliation, or simply restraint. While the masks were certainly uncomfortable and could incorporate painful elements, the visual aspect, the animalistic or foolish face, strongly suggests that shaming and ridicule were key components. Were they primarily torture devices masquerading as humiliation, or tools of social control that used shame as their main weapon? The answer likely lies somewhere in between, varying, depending on the specific device and how it was used. You walk head down, the heavy mask cumbersome and hot against your skin. The world outside the eye holes is a blur of faces, some sneering, some pitying. You hear the whispers, the titters of laughter. Every step is an effort. Every breath is constrained by the metal. You are utterly exposed, stripped of your individual identity, and replaced by a symbol of your shame. The punishment isn't just physical discomfort. It's the profound psychological weight of being publicly ridiculed, reduced to an object of scorn. It's like being the subject of a viral meme. Only the meme is physical painful and lasts for hours or days. The weight of the shame mask presses down a constant physical reminder of your transgression. The metal grows warm from your body heat, and the sun uncomfortable and suffocating. You can smell the faint metallic tang, perhaps mixed with your own nervous sweat. Every sound is slightly muffled by the metal casing around your head. You can see the blurry shapes of the crowd through the narrow eye slits, their faces indistinct, but their presence overwhelmingly real. You are on display, a living, breathing object lesson in what happens when you speak out of turn or behave disruptively. The duration of this punishment varied. You might be forced to wear the mask for a few hours a full day, or perhaps even longer, depending on the severity of your crime and the magistrate's mood. You might be left standing by the stocks or pillory, or march repeatedly through the busiest parts of the town. You couldn't hide. The mask ensured you were conspicuous. This wasn't just about causing temporary discomfort. It was about etching the memory of your humiliation into the minds of the community, and more importantly, into your own. A mainstream historical fact about shame masks. While often associated with minor social offenses, they could also be used for more serious crimes as part of a multi-stage punishment or as a prelude to further penalties. Sometimes wearing the mask was the punishment itself, but other times it might be followed by a whipping time in the stocks or even banishment. The mask marked you for public scorn before the next layer of consequences was applied. The design of the masks was often pointedly symbolic. A pig mask for someone accused of gluttony or being generally unclean in their habits. A donkey mask for stubbornness or foolishness. A long tongue or exaggerated mouth for gossips or liars. A particularly fierce or snarling mask for those deemed overly aggressive or violent in their speech. These weren't random shapes. They were visual condemnations instantly communicating the nature of your perceived failing to anyone who saw you. It's like being forced to wear a giant sign that says, "I talked too much about Brenda's questionable stew." Here's a quirky tidbit. Some scolds' bridles found in museums are surprisingly ornate or even decorated, suggesting they weren't always crudely made torture devices. Some feature etched patterns or slightly more refined metalwork. This has led some historians to speculate that they might have served a dual purpose: functional restraint and humiliation, but also perhaps as symbolic objects or even pieces of punitive folk art. Imagine a medieval blacksmith taking pride in crafting a particularly vicious-looking donkey snout. Ah, yes, my finest work, perfect for silencing Mrs. Gable down the lane. Really captures her stubbornness, wouldn't you say? Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of wearing the shame mask and enduring public ridicule was considered more effective or damaging than physical punishment by the authorities who employed them. Was the goal primarily to inflict mental distress and social isolation? Or was it simply a less lethal alternative to more brutal penalties for minor offenses? The balance between physical pain and psychological suffering as tools of control is a complex area of historical study, and these masks sit squarely in that uncomfortable intersection. As the hours pass, the initial shock and adrenaline wear off, replaced by a deep, weary humiliation. The weight of the mask becomes a physical burden, the stares of the crowd a constant oppressive pressure. You might feel tears prickling your eyes, but they are hidden behind the metal. You long to speak, to explain, to apologize, but your mouth is either clamped shut or your voice is trapped behind the unforgiving metal. You are reduced to silent endurance, waiting for the ordeal to end, praying for the moment the mask is finally unlocked and removed. When it finally comes off, the relief is immense, but fleeting. Your face might be bruised, your neck stiff, your tongue sore if a bridle was used. But the lasting effect is the memory of the shame. You were seen, you were judged, and you were ridiculed in front of everyone you know. That kind of public exposure leaves a scar that doesn't fade like a whip mark. It changes how people look at you, how you look at yourself. The shame mask might not break your bones, but it aims to break your spirit, making you think twice before you ever speak out of line again. It's a medieval lesson in keeping your mouth shut, delivered straight to your face. Stepping away from the crushing weight of the shame mask, and the psychological sting of public ridicule, we look upwards towards another form of medieval punishment that combined confinement, public display, and a slow, agonizing end. Imagine being trapped in a metal box, too small to stand comfortably, too exposed to the elements, and left hanging high above the ground. This was the fate for certain offenders, typically those found guilty of serious theft, highway robbery, or betrayal, crimes that disrupted the social order and threatened public safety in a significant way. This was the hanging cage, often called a gibbet. You stand at the foot of a tall wooden post, or a metal structure, maybe set up at a crossroads outside the town, a place where travelers would be sure to see it, a stark warning to anyone with sticky fingers or treacherous intentions. Above you, suspended by chains, is a cage. It's made of iron bands and bars, crudely fashioned, shaped roughly like a human body, but cramped and uncomfortable. It might be just big enough for a person to stand in, or maybe only big enough to crouch or sit in a fetal position. You can see the rust on the metal, feel the cold, hard texture of it as the guards prepare you. Your crime has led you here. Perhaps you robbed a merchant caravan or betrayed your lord's trust in a significant way. This punishment isn't about quick agony or immediate mutilation. It's about slow, suffering exposure and prolonged public display. It's medieval justice saying, "We're going to make an example of you, and that example is going to take its sweet, miserable time." Welcome to Medieval Live, Episode 1. Watch me die slowly in 4K, complete with ambient sound effects like wind and your own internal screaming. A mainstream historical fact about gibbeting, the practice of displaying the bodies of executed criminals, often in cages or on stakes, was common across Europe for centuries, becoming particularly widespread in the early modern period, but with roots in the Middle Ages. The purpose was explicitly deterrent. Placing the body on display in a prominent location served as a powerful visual warning to others who might contemplate similar crimes. It was landscape architecture designed to terrify. You are forced into the cage. It's a tight fit. The metal bars press against you from all sides. You can't stretch out. You can't get comfortable. You are literally confined within the shape of your punishment. The cage door is closed and locked, the heavy clang echoing unnervingly. You are trapped, a bird in a metal cage, but with none of the freedom flight offers. Then the cage is hoisted up. The chains creak as they strain under your weight and the weight of the cage. You ascend slowly, the ground receding below you. The faces of the guards and any onlookers shrink, becoming indistinct dots. The wind, which felt perhaps refreshing on the ground, now whips around you fiercely at this exposed height. The cage sways gently, a constant, unsettling motion. You are now suspended between heaven and earth, a prisoner of the sky. Here's a quirky tidbit about gibbet cages. While some were designed specifically for dead bodies that were already executed, others were clearly intended for living occupants. These often had slightly more structure, or might incorporate spikes to make even minor movements painful, ensuring the person remained in an agonizing position. Some accounts even describe adding additional weights to the cage to increase the suffering or hasten the end. Because if you're going to make someone slowly starve or freeze to death in a metal box, why not add some literal dead weight to the situation? It's the medieval equivalent of adding microtransactions to misery. Historians still argue whether the primary cause of death for those placed alive in hanging cages was typically starvation dehydration, exposure, from heat cold or rain, or a combination of factors leading to shock and organ failure. The specific conditions would vary greatly, depending on the weather and how long the person endured. Was it a slow death by thirst and hunger, or were the elements usually the quicker, albeit still agonizing killer? The records are graphic, but often lack precise medical detail about the cause of death. You are left hanging there, a solitary figure in a metal box against the skyline. The sun beats down on the metal, turning the cage into an oven during the day. At night, the temperature plummets, the metal becoming icy cold, draining your body heat. When it rains, you are soaked with no shelter. You are constantly exposed, utterly vulnerable to the whims of the weather. Thirst begins to set in a burning ache in your throat. Hunger follows a gnawing emptiness in your stomach. You call out, but your voice is lost on the wind, heard only by the crows that are already circling. You are in your own personal airborne prison, waiting for the end that you know is coming, slowly, surely, agonizingly. You are suspended in the air, the metal cage, your entire world. The swaying motion is constant nauseating. Below you, the world goes on. People travel the roads. Merchants pass by the town, lives its daily life. But you are removed from it all, a static suffering exhibit. The physical discomfort is relentless. The metal bars dig into your skin no matter how you shift. There is no comfortable position, only varying degrees of agony. Your muscles ache from being cramped. Your joints scream in protest. Thirst becomes an unbearable torture. Your mouth is dry, your tongue thick. You might lick the dew off the metal bars in the morning, a desperate, futile attempt to gain moisture. Hunger is a constant gnawing pain in your gut, but thirst will likely kill you faster. You watch the clouds drift by, praying for rain, only to be drenched in a cold downpour that offers momentary relief from thirst, but leaves you shivering and miserable. The sun rises and sets, marking the passage of time, each dawn bringing another day of suffering. A mainstream historical fact about gibbeting the cages were often placed in highly visible locations, like crossroads, or along major routes, specifically to maximize their impact as a warning. This wasn't just about punishing the individual. It was about creating a permanent grisly landmark that reminded everyone who passed by of the consequences of serious crime. Your death was a public service announcement, a very literal crime watch sign. As the days wear on, your strength drains away. Your body begins to consume itself. Your voice becomes weak hoarse, your calls for help or mercy reduced to faint whispers carried away by the wind. You might hallucinate from dehydration and exhaustion. The crows that circled earlier might become bolder, perching on the cage, their beady eyes watching you with unsettling intelligence. It's a slow, drawn-out descent into death, witnessed by anyone who happens to pass by. Here's a quirky tidbit. There are historical accounts suggesting that sometimes sympathetic locals or travelers might, despite the official prohibition, try to throw scraps of food or water up to the gibbeted person, attempting to offer some small measure of relief. These acts of clandestine kindness were risky as they undermined the punishment's intent, but they speak to a vein of human compassion that persisted even in the face of such public cruelty. Imagine the mixture of hope and despair as someone tries to toss a piece of bread up to you, only for it to miss and fall to the ground below. Historians still argue whether the intended duration of suffering in a gibbet cage was a specific calculated part of the punishment, or simply an unavoidable consequence of leaving a person exposed until death occurred naturally? Was the goal to maximize suffering for a set number of days, or simply to leave the body on display as a deterrent, with the duration of life within the cage being a secondary, albeit gruesome detail? The lack of precise instructions on how to manage the suffering suggests the latter might be more likely. But the choice of a slow death method points to suffering as a clear component. Your body weakens, your breath becomes shallower. The world outside the cage begins to fade. The sounds of the road, the wind, even the crows seem distant. You are retreating inward, your focus narrowed to the crushing discomfort, the burning thirst, the cold metal against your skin. You are no longer you. You are just a body in a cage, an advertisement for medieval law and order. Death, when it finally comes, is likely a result of exposure or dehydration. It's not quick, it's not clean, and it's not private. You simply fade away your body, giving up the fight against the elements and the lack of sustenance. But the punishment isn't over then. Your body remains in the cage, left to rot and be picked clean by scavengers. It's the ultimate indignity, your remains left on display for months, sometimes years, until only your skeleton rattles in the wind inside the rusty cage. You are a permanent fixture of the landscape, a chilling landmark that travelers would point out and shudder at. It really makes waiting in line at the DMV seem positively delightful, doesn't it? Even after death has mercifully taken you. From the confines of the hanging cage, your ordeal isn't truly over, at least not in the eyes of medieval justice. Your body now, a rotting, decomposing presence within the metal frame, remains suspended. The cage sways in the wind, a creaking, macabre mobile that serves as a constant visual punctuation mark on the landscape. The smell might become unbearable to those passing close by, the sight a source of fear and revulsion. This prolonged display of the dead body was a deliberate and crucial part of the punishment. This leads us to a larger point about all the punishments we've explored tonight. They weren't just about retribution, about making the offender pay for their crime. They were powerful tools of public spectacle, instruments of psychological warfare waged against the entire population. The iron chair, the breaking wheel, the tongue clamp hanged, drawn and quartered, the shame mask, and these hanging cages. They were all designed to be seen, heard, smelled, and remembered. They were the ultimate deterrent, brutal lessons etched not just onto the bodies of the condemned, but into the collective consciousness of society. A mainstream historical fact about medieval punishments, public executions, and displays of bodies were central to the functioning of the justice system. There were no prisons as we understand them today for long-term incarceration for most crimes. Punishment was swift, often physical, and designed to deliver a clear, unequivocal message about the consequences of breaking the law, and more importantly, challenging the authority of the church or the state. These spectacles reinforced power structures and discouraged dissent more effectively than any written law could. Imagine the daily reality of walking past a gibbet cage with a rotting corpse inside, or seeing the dismembered remains of a traitor displayed on city gates. These weren't hidden away. They were part of the scenery. It normalized a certain level of public brutality and served as a constant low-grade source of fear and anxiety. You'd think twice before stealing a loaf of bread if you knew the potential consequences involved being broken on a wheel or left to starve in a cage. It puts the phrase tough on crime into a whole new terrifying context. Here's a quirky tidbit related to the symbolism of these displays. Sometimes the locations chosen for gibbets or the display of body parts were specific to the crime. For instance, a pirate might be gibbeted on the coastline within sight of the sea, or a highwayman displayed at the crossroads where he committed his robberies. This added another layer of symbolic resonance to the punishment, directly linking the site of the crime to the site of the consequence. It's like getting pulled over for speeding and having your car permanently displayed on the side of the highway where you were caught, only, with your decomposing body still inside. Historians still argue whether the primary effect of these public punishments was truly deterrence through fear, or if they also fostered a sense of community cohesion by providing a common enemy, the criminal, and reinforcing shared values and social boundaries. Did they primarily inspire terror and obedience, or did they also serve a ritualistic function, binding the community together through shared witness to the enforcement of justice? It's a complex question about the psychology of crowds and the role of violence in shaping societal norms. You are a skeleton rattling in the wind, a gruesome wind chime playing a constant mournful tune for anyone passing by. Your once vibrant body has been reduced to bones and dust, your identity stripped away, replaced by the label of criminal. The birds perch on your cage, the weather weathers your remains, and the world below continues. But the message of your fate lingers, a silent scream against the indifference of the sky and the brutality of the age. These punishments were not just about ending a life. They were about ending a life in a way that would leave a lasting impression, a horrifying legacy that would hopefully prevent others from following the same path. They were designed to be unforgettable, visceral, and absolute in their demonstration of power. They make your worst public speaking fear, or that embarrassing moment you tripped in front of everyone, seem like a gentle pat on the back. The creak of the gibbet cage fades into the distance, becoming just another whisper on the wind. The smell of decay dissipates, replaced by the cleaner, if still earthy scent of the open countryside. We step back out of the chilling tableau of medieval punishment and return to the relative safety and comfort of, not being there. Because if anything is clear from our journey tonight, it's this: the Middle Ages were not the good old days. Unless your idea of a good time involved a very high chance of dying horribly in public for something as simple as complaining too loudly. These weren't just punishments designed to inflict physical pain. They were elaborate, often theatrical performances designed to break the human spirit, to humiliate, to degrade, and to instill a profound, paralyzing fear in anyone who witnessed them or even heard the stories. They were psychological warfare, writ large, and in very uncomfortable, often fiery metal. The goal wasn't just to kill you, it was to make your death a horrifying, unforgettable lesson for everyone else. Your body, or pieces of it, became props in a macabre play put on by the state. Think about the sheer scale of the difference between then and now. Today, if you break the law, you face fines, community service, or incarceration in a facility that, while certainly not pleasant, is designed in theory for rehabilitation or at least safe containment. Back then, the price of a misstep could literally be your tongue, your limbs, your entrails, or a slow, agonizing end in a public display designed to make sure your suffering served as entertainment and warning. It makes complaining about jury duty seem utterly ridiculous. A mainstream historical fact, practices like hanged, drawn, and quartered, and public gibbeting were not abolished overnight across Europe. They gradually declined over centuries, particularly with the rise of more centralized state power, professional police forces, and the development of penitentiaries as a primary form of punishment in the 18th and 19th centuries. The public spectacle aspect became less desirable or necessary for maintaining order in different political and social climates. Consider the executioners themselves. While often reviled, they were also necessary figures in this system. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some medieval towns, the executioner lived in a specific, often isolated house outside the main community, but might also have other duties considered unclean or undesirable by the rest of society, such as dealing with animal carcasses or cleaning cesspits. Their necessary but grim profession placed them in a strange ostracized position within the very society they served. Historians still argue whether the decline of these brutal public punishments was primarily driven by evolving societal morals and humanitarian concerns, or more by practical reasons related to the changing nature of state control. The development of alternative forms of punishment, like prisons, and the decreasing perceived effectiveness of public terror as a primary deterrent in more complex urbanized societies. Was it a moral awakening, or simply a shift in governance strategy? So the next time someone says they want to live in the good old days, show them this video, or maybe just recount a few highlights and remind them back then you didn't have the right to remain silent, only the chance to scream. Once, maybe twice if you were particularly resilient before the iron chair got going, or the executioner was slow with the club. But now the history lesson is winding down. The images of the wheel, the mask, the cage, they can feel heavy. Let them begin to fade like embers cooling in the dark. The screams are just echoes now, historical footnotes in the long, strange story of human justice. You are here safe, in your time, in your space. The air is still the sounds around you, familiar and gentle. The bed feels soft beneath you. You are not in the square, not on the hill, not in the cold, drafty room. That was then. This is now. Allow the lingering discomfort to dissolve like mist in the morning sun. Breathe slowly, deeply. Feel the weight of your body on the mattress, the soft fabric of your blankets. Let your muscles relax, your mind drift. The horrors of the past are safely contained within the stories we tell, lessons learned from a world that was often cruel, but thankfully is no longer our own daily reality. The silence is not the silence of the tongue clamp, but the peaceful quiet of a night winding down. The darkness is not the oppressive dark of a dungeon, but the soft, comforting dark of your room. You are safe. You are here. Just rest now. Sweet dreams.